You're a leader of a very powerful, very strong country, China.
Well, I have a great relationship with President Xi.
We're doing very well with China. I have a great relationship with President Xi, as you obviously know. We're doing really well. We're making a lot of money with China.
You know, our relationship with China is very good right now. And I'm going to go see President Xi in 2 weeks. I look forward to that, but I'll say I'm leading. We have very friendly competition. We haven't been challenged by China. They don't challenge us. We're going to have a meeting with President Xi. It's going to be, I think, quite amazing.
President Trump's Beijing summit with Xi Jinping is just over an hour away after months of anticipation. He's been touting their warm relationship. Will it be enough to seal a fresh deal on trade or even securing China's help in reopening the Strait of Hormuz? You're watching The China Show. We're counting down the market opens in Greater China. I'm Yvonne Man with David Ingles.
And our team is standing by in Beijing to bring you all the breaking news live, plus context and analysis as the two leaders chart the future of the world's most critical bilateral relationship.
You're watching our special coverage of President Trump's summit with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Over the next day, the world's focus shifts, at least briefly, from the Middle East to China. Delayed by the Iran war, the summit will give policymakers and investors a read on the fragile U.S.-China trade truce and where ties between the world's two largest economies go from here.
Standing by for us outside the Forbidden Cities, our Chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel. Also in Beijing for us is our China correspondent Leung here in Hong Kong in our studios with us to cover the market impact and what we're seeing across risk assets today. Our MLive executive editor Mark Cudmore. Before we get to the team and all the details, a quick glance at markets and market action right now, where it is largely a day to take on more risk. As you can see coming up on your screens, A50 futures are coming online in Singapore, 0.5% to the upside. Taiwan is opening higher, about 1.7% to the upside. We're also looking at, of course, the Kospi index and what a week it's been. And we are entering, of course, the Kospi index about an hour into the session there. And, of course, Nikkei 225 also about 0.7% to the upside. It's worth pointing out, of course, we are looking at some tailwinds, feeling the tailwinds coming through out of the U.S. session, and that is despite, of course, the hot PPI, and you have, of course, the 5% handle on the 30-year yield. A glance at where we are as far as the macro indicators are concerned. U.S. futures, the 30, the dollar index, and where you are with Brent prices as well. It's also worth pointing out we are also looking at earnings today. Massive move up in China proxies overnight. There we go. Golden Dragon up 4%. Crane shares, the KWEB ETF was up 5%. Double and triple in terms of the volumes coming through there, and Alibaba is set to rally here today. And of course, worth pointing out as well, related to the geopolitical story we're tracking in Beijing today, of course, the AI plays in China had a massive afternoon session. We were up 40% at the close. A lot to watch out for today here.
Yeah, you could say Jensen Huang on Air Force One heading to Beijing or arriving with Beijing with President Trump lifted the whole entire AI ecosystem in China as well, with speculation that maybe we could be seeing some loosened curbs when it comes to, of course, these tech exports. But yes, let's get to, of course, what's on the agenda. We're just over an hour away from that Trump-Xi meeting. Outside the Forbidden City is our Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel. Also in Beijing, our China correspondent, Min Lo. Steve, let's start with you. What's in store today?
So much is in store in a very short amount of time. Obviously, he's going to only really have about 36 hours between now and mid-afternoon when he gets back on Air Force One and heads back to the United States. There's all those geopolitical issues. We can talk about Iran all we want and what Donald Trump might want to be pressing Xi Jinping to get commitments from China to do more to wield its influence on Iran. There was a New York Times story that came out overnight as well that U.S. officials, intelligence officials have indicated they have evidence that perhaps Chinese entities are selling weapons to Tehran through third-party countries. That opens up a whole nother point of contention, no doubt. And again, we've heard from U.S. officials about their concern that China continues to buy the bulk of Iranian exports, even though, of course, the Strait of Hormuz is essentially closed. There's lots of avenues that the United States and Donald Trump perhaps will bring up in what he hopes to have a long talk with Xi Jinping about the war in Iran. But really right now, and the markets have been a proxy for the interest in the commercial side of this. Dan Ives of Wedbush writing to clients essentially saying the composition of this business delegation coming along with Donald Trump, including Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, sort of getting into a jump seat on Air Force One in Alaska and coming at the last minute here to China, arriving last night, indicates that the AI trade is perhaps up for negotiation here. And are not only the H20 chips, but the H200. There could be an indication that the White House has gotten that China would be willing, because keep in mind, Trump has approved, limited export licenses to sell those NVIDIA accelerators, AI accelerators to China. But it's China that is kind of held back. They want to build out their own indigenous innovation, their own chip infrastructure, as well as their large language models using their own indigenous innovation. So it's fascinating. And again, Dan Ives was talking about, when you have the key architect of the AI stack, essentially Jensen Huang, joining the president on a trip to China on essentially a trade mission / state visit, it raises the stakes of this next 36 hours. So we're going to be watching that extremely closely. Among all the other potential deals, whether it's a long-awaited Boeing aircraft deal with Kelly Ortberg, the CEO of Boeing here, you have Steve Schwartzman here, Jane Fraser of Citibank, you have, of course, Tim Cook, you have Elon Musk. He was on board Air Force One as well. Usually he'd be the top of the list of the characters that we'd be talking about. Elon Musk has been trying to get final approval of full self-driving here. He wants robo-taxis in China, hasn't gotten the final over the final hurdle yet. So he will obviously be trying to see what can come on the commercial side in this repairing of China-U.S. relations after what was a brutal tariff battle, tit for tat, upwards of 145% tariffs from the United States on China last year, and then China's retaliation and the strengthening of their lever with rare earths.
Yeah, we are expecting the two leaders to meet in about an hour from now. Min, I'll bring you in here. Looking across Chinese and state media, how is this being covered and framed this morning?
Overwhelming coverage of the Trump-Xi summit. I'll show you today's China Daily, the front page, a full spread here talking about a red carpet welcome for Trump in Beijing, and it goes on and on. The next page is all about this friendship bouncing along between U.S. and China, harking back to that ping-pong diplomacy. And you have a third page about U.S. business leaders expressing confidence in the Chinese market. There's just a lot of coverage across multiple different state media. And one line I keep seeing again and again is this emphasis that head of state diplomacy is absolutely irreplaceable. It can't be overemphasized how China attaches importance to Trump's trip. And I was just watching some of those visuals of the moment when President Trump landed yesterday, right, with huge fanfare, the red carpet. You have hundreds of youths waving the American and the Chinese flag and chanting, "Welcome, welcome," a very warm welcome. And it really reminds me, and it gives me the sense of deja vu, back in 2017 when President Trump first came and he received a very warm welcome. It was the first state visit that was designated State Visit Plus. And there was almost this honeymoon period. And after which, I think China was caught a little bit by surprise by the swiftness and the aggressiveness of Trump's first trade war. And you gotta wonder whether this time we would see a repeat of that, right? Where we have both sides really touting that personal rapport, that personal friendship between the two leaders. But when the summit is done and dusted, and when President Trump leaves, will he then turn around and bow to pressure from U.S. legislators to, come up with very unfriendly policies for China, whether it's approving that record arms sales to Taiwan or whether it's tech curbs on China or a re-escalation of those tariffs as well?
Yeah, it's certainly something we'll watch in terms of the welcome ceremony, this pomp and circumstance that I'm guessing China is really preparing for as well later today. Steve, I'll bring you back in. We've been talking about this for weeks now, about the position that Xi Jinping is in entering into these talks, that perhaps he is having a bit more leverage, given what we heard with rare earths and what they've done last year with that. What would look like a win for China in this summit?
Well, I'm sure that Taiwan is going to be something that Xi Jinping wants to talk to Donald Trump. Whether Taiwan and the arms sales package that is pending in D.C. is on the menu for, as a prize that Washington could potentially give to China by scaling back that arms package, or giving any indication that the United States in the Trump administration is going to change America's stance towards Taiwan, would be a big victory for Xi Jinping if it's obviously a change to their liking. So they are watching that very closely. But I just wanted to pick up as well on some of the points that Min was making about the arrival ceremony and about the confidence level that China has hosting this second state visit of Donald Trump. Back in 2017, Min mentioned that it was Yang Jiechi who welcomed Donald Trump. He's on the Politburo. He was the top diplomat. China likes to really use the protocol and these kind of ceremonies as signals of the level of importance. This time it was Han Zheng. He's a vice president, mostly ceremonial role. He went to King Charles' coronation. He went to the Trump inauguration, second term. He's not as quite high up, and he's no longer in the Politburo Standing Committee. So maybe, I don't want to read too much into it, but we have to. That's our job. It might be just a little notch below Yang Jiechi, and definitely a few notches below what President Obama in 2009 saw when Xi Jinping himself, who was then vice president, I have to say, he was not the president yet, but he was the anointed heir apparent. He went to the airport and visited Barack Obama. But anyway, the key two takeaways, according to Manny Menendez, who has been doing business here in China for 47 years, started with joint ventures. He basically arranged the first joint venture following the establishment of U.S.-China relations in 1979, the first big one of major Fortune 100 companies, joint venture down in Guangzhou between U.S. and Chinese entities. And he says the two most important things, and he's seen the ups and downs of this relationship over the last 47 years. He says the two most important things are continual top-level dialogue, not just 36 hours, but beyond this, and also guidelines for businesses on what are the parameters, where can we invest that will not run afoul of national security concerns on either side. Here's Manny Menendez.
With all that's going on in the world today, stability by the #1 and #2 economy of the world is I can't think of something more paramount. Figuring out how to agree to disagree with respect and finding common ground, I think needs to be worked on continuously, not in just 36 hours, but continuously. I'm really interested in is really having a better definition of national security. What constitutes, especially I'm talking from a business standpoint, where's that line drawn on national security when it comes to products and services? Because once the line is drawn, then the business community can then, I really believe, increase business between both countries.
And I think Manny makes a very big point, and it really dovetails nicely with what Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, has been talking about, and how they are discussing the possibility of a framework agreement like a Board of Trade, Board of Investment. And then there's that Reuters story today as well, that the two sides are potentially looking at each side identifying about $30 billion worth of particular products that could have tariffs reduced as long as they are not deemed national security threats to either country. So again, putting in frameworks and guardrails essentially to separate those industries and those products that are national security at the high of national security concerns, and then let commerce continue in other areas less sensitive.
Yeah, Steve, it seems like for businesses, it's really about getting that clarity about where the red lines are in order to encourage businesses to pour in money, to bring up, push up mutual investment again. And you talked about Han Zheng there receiving President Trump, right? And in a world where a lot of the communication happens behind closed doors, all we can do is really read into the tea leaves and the little sort of symbolism that is on display here on President Trump's trip. And you were talking about the leverage as the two sides enter into this summit, right? And one expert was putting it very nicely and saying that the U.S. in a way is fighting a war without winning, but China is winning without fighting, because you have the Iran war happening in the background. You have Marco Rubio saying they're hoping to convince China to play a bigger role to get Iran to back off. And meanwhile, China is sort of sitting back and just watching the U.S. Erode the American leadership in the eyes of the world and getting the side benefit of that. And again, when I was speaking to people in China, they were saying that you really, they can't really trust what Trump says. One person saying that he's a wolf in sheep's skin, and it's hard to trust what he says and what they can get out of this particular summit. And I think, like you said, it's really not about getting any grand bargain. It's about how the two sides can maintain that dialogue and maintain the equilibrium, perhaps to buy some time, 2 to 3 years of stability for both sides to plug any gap in their economies, right? For the U.S., it would be rare earths. For China, it would be closing the tech gap with the United States.
Team, fantastic context there as we head into, of course, a fairly consequential day in Beijing today. Our Chief North Asia correspondent there, Stephen Engel, and Min Min Lo also there in Beijing. In case you're wondering what the agenda looks like, what we know so far over the next, let's call it a couple of hours or so. So in the next, let's call it 90 minutes, the arrival is set at a Great Hall of the People. Donald Trump, of course, will be following that motorcade going into that. And, of course, in about an hour from now, of course, that meeting is expected to start. And going into tonight, that state banquet, of course, at the Great Hall of the People. Right, a couple of other things to note as well here. So I think we're hearing from Scott Bessent posting on X. This is following, of course, his conversation with He in South Korea, talking about how the economic and trade relationship, they discuss critical minerals there with his South Korean counterparts. I think those two things could be on the table as we go into today.
Yes, I mean, the meeting with He was supposed to be kind of ironing out and laying the pathway for these talks, right? There was going to be some expectation of this Board of Trade that the two sides wanted to kind of implement here on how to better look at, the tariff discussions moving forward. So it looks like things were okay. I mean, he talked about critical minerals with South Korea's prime minister. So certainly it seems like it was a pretty fruitful trip for Scott Bessent. On the flip side, we're hearing that Fox News did an interview with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who some pretty hawkish commentary, but to no surprise. Stability Indo-Pacific in China is in China's best interest. They cannot depend on China for a 100% of everything that we need. So once again, talking a little bit more about reducing that reliance with China, trade, Iran, among topics to be discussed with China later on today.
Yeah, airing the pre-recorded interview, of course, there at Marco Rubio, right? Lots more coming up here on the upcoming summit. We'll be speaking in the next hour with University of San Francisco's Kurt Gibbs. Of course, he was previously in Shanghai. We'll have more on that previous hat, of course, and his current hat. And also Bonnie Glaser will be joining us, of course, out of the German Marshall Funds on most things on the table today. As we count down to the open markets, have a look at where we are in futures, about 12 minutes away from the cash market open here in Hong Kong, up in Shanghai, and in between in Shenzhen. Here's a live look at Beijing. Big day today. This is the China Show. Good morning. Right, welcome back. You guys, in fact, are almost to the second, just in time as we look at the pre-markets. In fact, we should be getting those prices as we speak now. Alibaba was up 8% overnight. Tencent was up 5% in the U.S. We're up by 8% here in Hong Kong in the early goings. Mark Cudmore is with us here, our Bloomberg Markets Live executive editor, of course, here with us to talk us through this Chinese tech rally. Is it happening amidst what's going on, because of what's going on in Beijing, or despite that?
I think, first of all, it's been a bit disappointing in a longer-term framework compared to like some of the U.S. names. But I think there's, it's sustainable. And I think it's actually like where the kind of AI rally has got legs as it kind of broadens out. I think obviously at the earnings yesterday, I think people were at a top-down level, maybe a little bit disappointed. But I think, our favorite markets producer, Anthony Stevens, has made a good case that, the commitment to the AI theme is probably quite bullish, and people will probably like that. So I actually think that, the Hong Kong I call it more the Hong Kong tech rally because I think a lot of people play it through the Hong Kong trades.
Yes.
But it's the Greater China tech rally is very different from the US, but it's the more sustainable one, and it's the one with better valuations. And it's particularly since we've got such extreme valuations in the US side, it's the ones that are going to appeal people for the kind of long-term investing. So I think it's sustainable.
Let's talk about today, just for the sake of it, because S&P's at records. We're talking about Shenzhen was at a record. I mean, there's just so much still of optimism around this whole AI trade. Is anything today in Beijing in this meeting that could change that?
Absolutely. I actually think today's got very large tail risks. It's not my base case. My base case is that we get through this and we kind of move on from it next week. We get the usual platitudes. We get a few commitments to buy some stuff, a few trade deals. We get very excited. But the reason we're all paying attention is valid because, you know what? As long as Donald Trump's on the scene, and Donald Trump's on the scene with China, a lot of anything could happen. And so the tail risks are real. They are tail risks rather than base case, but they're non-negligible. So I think we've got to pay close attention to this. But my assumption is that we'll kind of get through it. There'll be some positive headlines, and we'll probably rally out of it. My words is that I think, I was saying this earlier in the week, is that I actually think, we rally into this in volatile fashion. We rally afterwards in relief if we don't get those tail risks. And then after that, we're going to go, okay, now back to, what is it? Oh, the Iran conflict. Oh, wait, we don't have a resolution on that yet.
Yeah.
And that's when we actually start maybe trading a bit more negatively again.
What tail risks are top of mind?
I mean, it's anything.
It's anything but what's happening in Beijing?
I think it does. So, I mean, I need to emphasize this is speculative, right? Because we don't know. But, there's anything from, does Trump say something on Taiwan because he wants to get some support on Iran? Make some concessions. Or does the fact that stock markets are at record highs means we get that, there's the idea of the Fed put. There's also the Trump call, so that when stock markets are at record highs, Trump goes more aggressive on some of his hardline issues. Yeah. So with stock markets at record high, maybe that's when he goes, you know what, I'm going to get a win on China because that's what I need from a domestic press because the markets are supporting me right now. So maybe that's when he goes, 100% tariffs on everything again. We get those kind of crazy headlines. So I need to emphasize, I don't expect any of these things. It's not the base case. The point is that when Donald Trump goes on these visits, tail risks are possible. Yeah, exactly. So I really want to emphasize this is not the expectation. This is speculation, but this is why we're on tenterhooks. Yeah.
What else is your team on tenterhooks on today? What are you guys working out?
I think that the bigger picture is that AI dominates everything else. Yeah. And we generally think, with a bit of debate within the team, but I guess I'll give my view. I get to have that now, so I'm in the seat
yes,
right now.
The mic.
Yeah, exactly. I think the CapEx... AI capex bubble has a long way to run still, and that's still inflation stage, and I think that dominates everything. But I think that the Strait of Hormuz situation has not gone away. And, the longer that goes on, at some point we're going to have to confront the issue that I think that we're impressed by the strategic petroleum reserve releases in the US are going much faster than expected. There's not the big physical problem we expected so soon. But it's not getting resolved just because it hasn't really hit yet. And Strait of Hormuz was clearly overhyped in terms of its impact, in terms of the blockage. Doesn't mean that it has no impact. And if there's no solution there, this is going to become a really, really big problem. We saw PPI yesterday. We saw CPI properly. The US has a serious inflation problem. I think the narrative in US yields is changing. I think that means that the narrative in the dollar might be changing. So all these dynamics matter. And so you've got to think on the Strait of Hormuz, either there's no resolution or resolution comes through material escalation. So I actually think it'll move quite back into focus and in negative focus. And as you know, I'm very, very bullish on the AI capex bubble still long term. But I'm quite worried for the next month of trading because of the Strait of Hormuz.
Mark, fantastic. Thank you so much. Mark Cudmore there, of course, with the context on everything that's taken place. There we go. Look at the live pictures there out of the Great Hall of the People. I almost feel like they're cheering for us and some of the commentary coming through out of Mark there in the bullish comments. Yes, we'll take you straight back, of course, there to Beijing, where in about just over 30 minutes from now we are expecting, of course, the U.S. president to arrive and, of course, that meeting with the Chinese president, Xi Jinping.
You're watching The China Show. We got the Open coming up next, and certainly watching, of course, what happens with these tech plays here today. When you take a look when it comes to Tencent, Alibaba, intraday, and we're taking already, the pre-market is up substantially for Alibaba. We're up some 8%. It's interesting with those earnings too, Dave, right? The headline numbers were not so great. When you talk about, when it came to Baba, 3% revenue growth for the top line wasn't that good. But under the hood, when you talk about the expecting to triple in terms of their AI revenue by the end of this year, I think that was enough for investors to say, look, maybe things are going to pay off, but it's going to start bearing fruit soon. Yeah, and we might not have to wait that long in terms of Alibaba to really play out. And I think between the two stocks, which is interesting too, because these two actually have been brought up
by most in the sales side as perhaps the best ways, longer-term bets on the AI play because of just the sheer coverage in terms of their respective businesses there, and the potential that AI brings if you're able to then sort of apply the technology onto their businesses. It does seem the market is picking Alibaba today more than it is Tencent, and of course, coming up in a few minutes from now, CLSA will be joining us to talk us through both and whether or not both make sense. Does one make sense over the other? So that's really a conversation we'll be having, of course, as we go into the opening bell today. Apart from that, a couple of other things. CSI 300, we are nearing the 5,000 level for the first time in 4 years. The China Index at the close finally topped the 2015 highs. Tailwinds are behind us going into the open today. The open is next. This is the China Show. Welcome back. We have special coverage, of course, here on the China Show today. Live pictures coming through out of Beijing, where we are expecting the ceremony, the U.S. president to arrive there at the Great Hall of the People in about half an hour from now. Of course, we'll keep on top, of course, of all of that as we go into the open today. Lots on deck as far as conversations goes, and of course, as market conversations go, there is an overlap between those two.
Yeah, I mean, you can say really the AI ecosystem is doing very well when it comes to what you saw in the U.S., what you saw in China just yesterday. So I think Jensen Huang in China is also really lifted all boats, it seems like, when it comes to the chip side of things, and really, puts AI back in the agenda here today as a spotlight of these talks. It certainly adds to a lot of interesting sort of developments that could happen in the next 36 hours. It's a very tight sort of time frame for President Trump. But yes, as we talked about, the welcome ceremony is about half an hour's time. Then they're going to have their bilateral summit, and then there's going to be a state dinner later on tonight as well. Followed tomorrow, they're going to have more bilats in terms of a tea and lunch. That's according to the White House in the schedule for the next 36 hours or so. So there you go. It's going to be pretty jam-packed. And in terms of markets, though, we're entering into this summit here on very positive tones. Take a look at the CSI 300. There you go. Back above that 5,000 level, as Dave mentioned, that is a 5-year high. Chinex, we're seeing extending those rallies there. We're up another 1% and now reaching a record high for that benchmark. So certainly it is, once again, the AI plays, the Zhipus, the Minimaxes, Capricorn Tech. There you go. CATL is doing very well. We're up some 3% there in Shenzhen. And the chip space continues to outperform today. Capricorn is up 1.25 right now. Shanghai crude is slightly to the downside here. So, it really have moved away from the whole Iran situation. The focus now is really what is happening here in this part of the world, in the Chinese capital. But all signs point to maybe we could see some more stability between the U.S. and China relationship, and we'll see if that continues when it comes to risk sentiment here today. You take a look at how we're seeing some of the largest movers yesterday on the Chinex, right? So it was the whole AI supply chain, whether it's the optical stocks, the server stocks, the like. We talked about Zhipu in Hong Kong was up from 30-something% in the late part of the session there. Really, it was kind of a delay reaction possibly to this whole Jensen Huang news, the last-minute addition on Air Force One as he heads to Beijing. But certainly, we are seeing when it comes to the Shenzhen side of things, it continues to be hot there. Eptolink Technology up 2%. Suzhou Tech Optical also up some 5%. In terms of Hong Kong, this is what we're looking at. We're 1.5% to the upside here today. The key thing to watch is Alibaba, Tencent. There you go. 7 to 8% gains for Baba here right now. Really following what we saw when it came to the ADRs. Tencent was also up. But Alibaba maybe stood out a little bit more, just given some of the numbers that the CEO, Eddie Wu, gave in that earnings call here, talking about, they're about to bear fruit in terms of the whole AI monetization story, despite the fact it was the first operating loss since early COVID times, despite the fact that revenue growth was at just a mere 3%, right? So we really largely shrugged off the top line sort of numbers there and really looking at what's in store by the end of the year here when they're talking about what? Triple in terms of their revenue here in terms of AI. So certainly that's the still the tailwinds that we're seeing across the HS Tech space here. And once again, we're seeing that catch-up story being played out. But there you go. You're still seeing, though, when it comes to the pure plays, Zhipu, Minimax are doing quite well in Hong Kong today. Minimax as well as Zhipu both up some 2%. 52.40 for HS Tech here right now. I just want to take a look at what's going on with New World. So there has been some reports about Hong Kong Airport Authority taking over 11 Skies Retail from the property developer. There was also our scoop that Blackstone has also dropped out of that $4 billion deal over control clashes. They're coming out with a statement. So they're saying no agreement has been reached with any potential investor right now. They wanted to seek some clarification there. The 11 Skies project discussions are ongoing. There has been no pact that's been reached with the airport authority in Hong Kong. They will manage the financing arrangement with lenders and not aware of any deadline for a reset of those financing terms. So trying a bit more clarity here from the developer itself. The stock, though, is still down some 3%, Dave.
Okay, let's pivot away from the market just very briefly. We will revisit it, I promise you, in a couple of minutes here, of course, given the rally we're seeing. Baba's up 8, Baidu's up 7, Tencent's up 4%. The other big story, of course, is what's happening in Beijing. And in about 30 minutes from now, we are expecting the U.S. president to meet the Chinese president, of course, there at the Great Hall of the People. In fact, standing by for us there, Anne-Marie Hordern, our Bloomberg surveillance co-anchor, is with us right now. She's made the trip. She's in this part of the world. Anne-Marie, good morning. Nice to see you, sir. So tell us, how is this being covered? What's top of mind for you as we count down to this historic meeting today?
Good morning, David. Yeah, the eyes of the world are really on Beijing as the leaders of the two biggest economies are going to be meeting here. Just under 30 minutes time, we will have President Xi Jinping greeting President Trump right behind me here at the Great Hall of the People. That's the entrance. And of course, to the other side is Tiananmen Square, and across the street is the Forbidden City. So really the heart of Beijing when it comes to the political power apparatus in China. Top of mind for me really here is, what is the discussion going to look like? You know better than anyone else that how the Chinese like to really coordinate these meetings is to make sure that every single deliverable is done months in advance, and normally this would just be ceremonial. But already this has been quite an unpredictable trip, with the president picking up NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang yesterday on the refueling stop in Alaska. So I'm really interested to see if there's any sort of unpredictable moments that come out of this meeting. Of course, we're going to be looking at the 3 T's. Trade, when it comes to the tit for tat between these two countries, the détente they had when it comes to export controls, rare earth minerals, and their trade war that they have until October. And of course, you had Secretary Bessent meeting with He Lifang yesterday in Seoul in the lead up to this meeting today. And then, of course, the future of technology. Are they able to establish, what some officials told us before the trip, an AI channel? You have the likes of Elon Musk here, Meta's Dina Powell, and of course, Jensen Huang. And then finally, the national security space, which is going to be the most tense aspect of this meeting. The Iran war, of course, clouds this trip. This trip was delayed because of the United States dealing with the conflict in Iran. China is, of course, the biggest purchaser of Iranian crude. China recently told some of these firms that they could ignore U.S. sanctions when it comes to Iran. And then, of course, the big pressure point for Xi Jinping to exert on the United States is going to be Taiwan. Ahead of this trip, the president said he would discuss the arms sale that's in the docket when it comes to Taiwan. And this is going to be something that a lot of China hawks in Washington, D.C. will be paying close attention to.
Anne-Marie, I'm interested to know, because leading up to this summit, the narrative on the ground there is that Trump needs this meeting more than Xi needs it here, that the Chinese president is in a more of an emboldened sort of position, given what we heard and what we saw last year with rare earths and the like. The U.S. seems to be still distracted by this war in the Middle East. What does Trump want to achieve in this? I know we talk about beef, we talk about soybeans, we talk about Boeing. That seems to be low-hanging fruit. But what would constitute a win for the U.S.?
Well, absolutely. I think that's a good point. These massive purchasing agreements, especially going into the midterm elections, could be really paramount for the president to bring home as wins. You know, soybeans, the Cargill CEO will be here. The Boeing CEO will be here. There's obviously a lot of anticipation of a massive jet deal. I do think China comes into this meeting in a more assertive stance, given the fact that they have used when it comes to the rare earths and their chokehold on rare earths as a real leverage point with the United States as a negotiating table. But I think it would be naive to think that China also does not need the United States. Of course, China is still trying to get their hands on the most high-powered, advanced technological semiconductors, which is why it's very interesting that Jensen Huang, with the last-minute ad, Remember, China does not have access to Blackwell. NVIDIA is going to be coming out the Vera Rubin later this year. Right now, this administration actually made a U-turn in January to allow the H200 chips to come into China. But so far, according to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick last month testifying in the Senate, we've learned that China has not bought a single one yet. So I think it would be naive to say that both these countries don't need each other in some aspect, especially China, of course, when it comes to trade. And I was looking at the numbers. 1980, China accounted for 1% of the U.S. trade. Now it's more like 16%. So I think both these companies understand that they need each other. And I think right now this is really just about managing that competition going forward.
Anne-Marie, fantastic. Anne-Marie Horner there in Beijing for us, right outside the Great Hall of the People. We will be revisiting, of course, our coverage there on the ground. Our whole team is in Beijing, of course, to cover the various aspects to this. We just touched on trade just now in chips. And really soon, I guess you had a look at some of the big AI plays in Hong Kong into the close yesterday. Massive rally, 40% on the back of perhaps news that Jensen Huang was joining. And, of course, there's the earnings overlay here with Alibaba rallying the most. Let's call it 7-8 months in extremely heavy volumes in the early first 9 minutes of trade here in Hong Kong. Elinor Leung is with us here, head of Asia Telco and Internet Research at CLSA, to help us understand the earnings. Very nice to see you. Good morning.
Thank you.
I think my first question is, comparing the two, market seems to be happier with Alibaba than it is with Tencent, relatively,
it has been,
of course.
Though, for much of this year, right?
Yeah.
Yes, correct. We are entering a very exciting moment of the AI eras, that moving away from model training and to actual application, and to P monetization is a lot easier compared to C. That's why what get people excited is the AI cloud, which Baba is better positioned for the AI cloud compared to Tencent. So I think last night result on Alibaba, the management given a very bullish guidance on their cloud growth. So the external cloud revenue already accelerated to 40% year-on-year growth in the last quarter. They expect that will further accelerate with noticeable margin expansion. They're so bullish is because they think that AI revenue is going to be able to grow at a triple digit and contribute more than 50% of the cloud revenue in 1 year's time. That is driven by MaaS, Model as a Service, which ramping up very quickly in China, which including agentic applications such as coding, productivity, generative video, tools for the enterprises, and they're willing to pay, and they have a chance to raise prices now because we are not just model training, which is a commoditized service, but now we are able to differentiate in capability, or we're able to raise prices there. So that is driving their cloud growth, and the company expect to achieve $100 billion USD revenue with 20% margin in 5 years' time.
Yeah. Run us through some of those numbers, right? I was looking through that. So they said 10 billion renminbi in terms of AI intelligence services revenue, right? So that's by June, 30 billion by the end of the year. Are those tall orders, you think? Or do you think they'll be easily they can surpass these numbers?
I think they can surpass the numbers because the demand in China is very high. The bottleneck is the chip supplies. Right now is that the demand is far greater compared to supplies. As you know, that China has a chip constraint because we cannot buy a lot of the NVIDIA chip. But luckily, starting this year, the domestic chip supply start picking up. So we expect the token in China is going to up 4 times this year in China, but over 70% is inference chip demand, and China is going to go 100% self-sufficient in domestic inference chip. So that will help to support the growth. And you're also seeing that China doesn't really have a SaaS industry in the past, meaning that when these agentic applications come through, people jump onto it. So even OpenCrawl, a good example is that OpenCrawl is started in the US, but China is more enthusiastic about OpenCrawl WorkBuddy from Tencent and Crawl from Baba, and we think that the agentic adoption in China could be a lot faster and a lot cheaper in China as well.
Just to ask you on thinning margins, do I have to lose a minute of sleep over thinning margins, or is that not relevant at this point in time when it comes to the growth story of Alibaba?
Right. I think what pressuring margin is on two fronts. One is on the e-commerce side. They're investing a lot on quick commerce. And the other one is AI, and they're also investing a lot on AI. I'm not too worried about the AI investment because if they can achieve $100 billion USD cloud revenue in 5 years, this year, if they spend $30 billion USD in CapEx, I think it's worth it if you can get into that revenue. So I think the monetization trend right now is pretty obvious. I think return is going to be pretty good if you can get 20% margins there. And on the e-commerce side, the quick commerce competition has become more gradually more rationalized. So they see the quick commerce losses going to halve this year, so it's moving in the right trend, and all other losses, meaning the user acquisition for their Queen app, is also come down in the coming quarter. So profitability should start improving in June quarter.
Investor preference still leans towards the pure plays, right? We talk about what's going on with Zhipu, Minimax. They're more low cost sort of AI plays right now. Do you think this is the inflection point then, that maybe Alibaba, Tencent can maybe start catching up to some of these names now?
Yeah, pure play always runs faster compared to incumbents because incumbent has legacy business, which will drag the growth, which is very understandable. But we still prefer incumbent because they offer a full stack AI services. Baba have their T-head chip, have their cloud, have their model, have their application. So their cost per million token will always be lowest in the market. And for this standalone model, they always have to charge a premium because you don't have an efficient infrastructure, which means that your model has to be the best in the market, meaning you cannot be a general model. You cannot invest in agentic as well as video. At the same time, you just don't have the capital to do so. So for these standalone model, we think they have to choose a direction. I think agentic could be easier for them. And you have to focus on that and focus on certain customer. But Baba is different. They're going to cover everything from coding, productivity to video generative, and they cover the broadest industry. And that's why they will capture the largest dollar amount in the cloud services. So they are the largest cloud in China with 28% market share, but they also grow the fastest with 40%. So you can see how benefit they come from this AI trend.
The next comparable, almost parallel, is Tencent, of course, but it's different because it's gaming and social media. Is the AI path of Tencent as clear as it is with Alibaba, or are you slightly more bullish on that because of the legacy business?
Right. So you buy Baba, you buy for the cloud, and you buy Tencent for the AI application. So Baba is more to C, Tencent is more to, Baba is to B, Tencent is more to C. They already generate AI revenue in game, in advertising, but to C monetization, like AI chatbot, is more difficult to monetize compared to B. And that's why the stock is kind of lagging compared to Baba. And also, the year-to-date correction is more of a multiple contraction because they don't have a competitive model today. Hunyuan 3.0 is a good start. It offers good capability at a competitive price, but it's still a small model, 256 billion model. They need a much bigger model, like trillion parameter model, with more enhanced reasoning as well as agentic capability to support the AI application. They need to come up with that for a bigger re-rating in the share price. Now we are waiting for that one.
And is it your understanding or expectation that they are working on something
yeah, definitely
beyond it?
working. They totally overhaul
Okay.
the AI, the LLM team. They hire somebody away from OpenAI to lead the team right now. And so they expect that they could have a trillion parameter model in months. So that will help them to accelerate the AI application creation. But Tencent's the biggest competitive venture is the ecosystem, 1 billion people, millions of mini programs, and that take their competitor more than 10 years to build. So that is very difficult to break for Tencent.
All right, Elinor.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Elinor Leung there, Head of
Thank
Asia, Telecom, and Internet Research at CLSA. When you talk about what's going to be on tap here in Beijing, we were talking about as Elinor mentioned, right, the likes of Baba is going to need NVIDIA chips if they need to continue on with this whole AI journey. And certainly Jensen Huang being there has really kind of made it a little bit more interesting, right, this meeting. Let's bring back our Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Ingle, who is, of course, on the ground for us there in Beijing. Steve, we're just moments away from this welcome ceremony. It's interesting to see, the delegation, and I think we talked about this yesterday, about Jensen Huang being there. You're seeing when it comes to the markets, it completely lifted AI to AI-related stocks, on just the prospect of him being where you are. What could come out of this meeting with Jensen Huang there?
Well, I don't mean to overhype it, but it's quite extraordinary, the list of names that we talk about on a daily basis from afar here in Asia. They are here in Beijing along with President Trump, whether it's Jensen Huang, as Dan Ives of Wedbush says, he's the king, essentially, the key architect of the AI stack, being the head of NVIDIA. So absolutely, I think his presence here, and we don't necessarily know exactly yet what is going to be negotiated and what deliverables we're going to get. The fact that he jumped on the jump seat of Air Force One, of course, I'm sure he had a more comfortable seat than that, but he came to Beijing last night. That has, sent some tongues a-wagging about what could possibly be announced. Not necessarily on Blackwell and the most advanced, what's coming down the road, Rubin, but again, the chipsets of the H200, which the Trump administration has already approved to export to China, on a limited export license basis. But China has chosen not to authorize their companies to buy it yet. That could be in the offing, or even the more downgraded version, the H20, which has approval to be sold here. But again, China is trying to build up its own indigenous innovation, and they have been trumpeting some of their successes in their own chipsets and also their large language models. But again, it would be a positive, as we've seen on the market, it's positive to the Chinese AI plays if that could be given the green light. It's speculative right now, but the fact that Jensen Huang is here. Also, Elon Musk is here. He was on Air Force One. Is he any closer to getting the full self-driving approval across the line in China and his ambition for robo-taxis here? He has big interests and big intentions of going big here in China. And we all know that, Tim Cook has been to China many times. He was at the China Development Forum, a regular participant there. He has a massive supply chain through his OEM partners here in China. So there could be some announcements on that front. Clearly, Kelly Ortberg, the CEO of Boeing, is here because it's long anticipated, including, David Perdue, the U.S. ambassador to China, told me a couple of months ago in Hong Kong that, yes, the Boeing deal is definitely, well, not definitely going to happen. It's happening. Right? So it's possibly going to be announced in the next 36 hours. So there are a lot of great opportunities for American companies. Now, what is China? China's been far less transparent on the deliverables they want. So we'll have to see that. That's an interesting part to me. Steve, great stuff. Stephen Engel, of course, is standing by for us there. Will continue to stand by for us there in Beijing. Of course, he's outside the Forbidden City. We'll do a few skips across a couple of blocks away, big blocks, I should mention there, of course, in Beijing, and take you straight now to the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. Anne-Marie Hordern, of course, our Bloomberg surveillance co-anchor, is standing by for us there, and, of course, awaiting the arrival of the U.S. president. Anne-Marie, we spoke earlier on some of the key issues that they'll touch on, business and perhaps potential deals and some sticking points. I want to ask you about how Iran and also Ukraine, and we got a very good reminder that that's still going on, of course, about an hour back with the mayor of Kyiv, I believe, talking about this missile attack, that those two things are still happening against the backdrop of this meeting. In what ways do you suspect the U.S. could seek some assistance from Beijing in as far as their objectives, as far as those two are concerned?
Well, certainly both of these issues will be brought up at the table, and we even heard that last week when Ambassador Jameson Greer joined us on surveillance and talked about any regime that's basically getting money from China, because China buys the lion's share of Iranian oil, will, of course, be a topic that the president brings up. And I think officials would tell you from the United States that this is a continuation of a conversation when it comes to Russia and Iran, and how China helps them in terms of dual-use products when it comes to weapons, specifically when it comes to Iran. That'll be a real cloud on this trip. I mean, first, this trip is only happening now. It was pushed back because of the conflict in Iran. On top of that, we talked about China being the biggest buyer of crude. They recently told their teapot firms to basically snub and ignore U.S. sanctions. On top of that, the Washington Post has a story out about an intel assessment from the United States that China has been using the Iran war, one, to sell weapons to United States Persian Gulf allies, and also to help U.S. allies, especially in the Asia Pacific, that are really in need and energy starved, to get some of that crude. You know, China has 1.4 million barrels of crude in stockpile. For some context, that's more than the United States and the eight other bigger crude oil stockpilers in the world. So they could help in terms of maybe bringing down some of those energy costs. So I think that's how both of those conversations are going to play here. Of course, the other big and most important tense topic is going to be Taiwan. The United States, this Trump administration in December, greenlit an $11 billion arms sale package to Taiwan. There's a $14 billion arms sales package that is still in the works and on the docket. And one of our colleagues was recently in Taipei, Jenny Leonard, and spoke to a Taiwanese official who said they don't want to be on the menu when it comes to these negotiations that are about to take place here in Beijing. Of course, Taiwan is an issue that China is going to press. Xi Jinping would love the United States to alter any such language on how they view Taiwan's sovereignty and would love to slow roll the next arms package. This has gotten a lot of attention in Washington, D.C. It is not unprecedented for a U.S. president to hold off on an arms package just ahead of a big summit like this. The question is going to be what happens when the president returns to Washington.
Fantastic. Anne-Marie there at the Great Hall of the People, Stephen Engel, who just joined us a few minutes back, of course, at the Forbidden City. Let's bring in Karishma Vaswani, our Bloomberg opinion columnist right now, to talk us through several key complexities here, Karishma. And, you know, we used Taiwan. We ended on Taiwan just now with Anne-Marie and how that perhaps could be used as bait. Just where is your mind in as far as this is concerned? Why is Taiwan so too precious, I guess, pun intended, a chip to be bargained away here?
Yeah, David, I think Anne-Marie really, framed that very well. Taiwan is integral to U.S. policy in the Indo-Pacific. And as I argue in my column, simply too precious to become trade bait in any sort of eventual deal between the U.S. and China. And what is the reason for that? Well, look at where it sits geographically. It is a key node in the security architecture in Asia. It is part of the First Island chain. It helps to restrain geographically China's reach and expanse of the military. But more importantly than that, arguably, is the fact that in any competition in terms of future industries like artificial intelligence, Taiwan is home to 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors. That means getting access to that, maintaining the ability to access that in a free and fair way is crucial for American businesses, especially in this race in artificial intelligence in the future with China. Now, none of this will be lost on Xi Jinping. Taiwan, as Anne-Marie was saying, is that key sensitive red line for the Chinese. It's become part of the legacy for Xi himself when he's talked about unification with the island, either through peaceful means or by force. And it has become very much part of the background discussions in the lead up to the two-day meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. My advice to President Trump is to keep Taiwan off the table. It is far too important to trade away as bait in these discussions.
Yep, and you're looking at those live pictures of the Great Hall of People here right now, where some of the U.S. delegation there, I see the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent there, the Trade Representative Jameson Greer, and Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, all there, Stephen Miller as well in the front row, ready to greet, of course, President Trump. The back, the second row is where the CEOs are sitting. I see Steve Schwarzman, Tim Cook coming from Cupertino, also from the likes of...
Jane Fraser's there.
Oh, yeah, you see Jane Fraser. Where is Jensen Huang? I'm trying to look here, Dave. Right now.
I'm looking for a black leather jacket.
I see David Solomon from Goldman Sachs. Certainly, you're seeing the delegation is there, ready on that red carpet to greet. We are.
Oh, there's Jensen Huang.
Oh, there you go. We see him. He's actually the first in line there, actually. We missed him during that pan.
Okay.
But there you go. Just goes to show the scale of which the U.S. has brought this delegation to Beijing, the first overseas trip for President Trump since this Iran war began. And you see where the priorities lie, just given where the business side of things is, right? It's Jensen Huang in the very top, the front of the line there, Elon Musk behind them, and then Tim Cook. I think the fact that Jensen Huang is standing there in the front certainly is quite telling, given that he was a last-minute addition to this trip. And I think, in D.C., there was a lot of talk leading up to this meeting that perhaps it was a good thing that Jensen Huang was not invited. And then now we have this, according to the spokesperson, said, it just worked out in Jensen Huang's schedule to be picked up in Alaska during that stop. So certainly it's going to be really interesting what's going to be on the agenda. Of course, we're just moments away from this welcome ceremony here. And then we're going to have that bilateral summit just about the bottom of the 10 o'clock hour local time in Beijing. And yes, Dave, the optics are going to be very, very, very important here.
Especially when you have this lineup, right,
yeah,
of business leaders coming to town. And I think you can't help but wonder, let me just crowbar in that you two hit with or without you, right? That's the chip analogy I can think of right now, and as far as China being able to go on its own, but certainly any help as far as the cutting-edge chips will help. So with or without you, that's a really good way of thinking about, in my opinion, of course, this conversation. In fact, I would imagine just a few steps, a few meters from where this live picture is taking place of U.S. officials and business leaders and Elon Musk, as you can see there on your screens. Anne-Marie Hordern is still with us, of course, Bloomberg Surveillance, our co-anchor. She's there at the Great Hall of the People. Anne-Marie, as we look at this lineup, this business delegation, one can't help but think of the truckload of deals that potentially we could see by the end of this trip. Just help us understand the business implications here for both sides.
Massive business implications, about $20 trillion standing on the steps of the Great Hall of the People right now, just a stone's throw of where I am here. Of course, you have the president's cabinet, the Treasury Secretary, who last night was in Seoul, finalizing a lot of what potentially we're going to see take place here today with He Fang, his counterpart when it comes to the trade agreements. And then, of course, all the business executives. You have Citi's Jane Fraser, Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, Lloyd Blankfein, the former Goldman Sachs CEO, was joining the president in 2017. These are individuals who want to get access to China's capital markets. And then, of course, Elon Musk and Jensen Huang, individuals that flew with the president on Air Force One here to Beijing. When it comes to Jensen Huang, he was this last-minute ad in Alaska during a refueling stop, and lots of speculations and questions whether or not chips will once again be back on the negotiating table.
Steve, chime in here. I mean, the delegation that's quite a lineup here of CEOs. Tell us what the optics look like to you, and what does it tell you about, there's all this talk about maybe China might start, I'm going to interrupt myself. There you go. Chinese President Xi Jinping going down the steps of the Great Hall of the People, now ready to greet with the U.S. President Donald Trump, who's expected to arrive just moments away. Interestingly enough, it seems, it's going to be so interesting to see how these two, there's going to be a handshake, I'm guessing. But I remember when I was at APEC late last year in South Korea, the tone of which these two did strike was one of really friendship, right? He's a good friend of mine. They were talking about the phone calls that they have made over the years. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see the language of which these two men are going to portray here, given so much has happened in the last 6 months since APEC, right? When you talk about the Supreme Court ruling, which has, of course, lowered and reduced some of those effective tariffs to China. You talk about this Iran war. The dynamics have changed dramatically, Dave.
Absolutely. And I think that really brings to mind the most recent narrative that's come up, that China is coming at this because of external factors from a largely stronger position of strength in terms of leverage. But that's also not to say that the U.S. side does not have any specific leverage in as far as conversations go. As we look at the Great Hall of the People, we are just looking at his motorcade, of course, and we imagine that any moment now we are expecting the U.S. President Donald Trump to make his way into the Great Hall of the People. We just showed you just now, of course, the Chinese president make his way down those steps at the Great Hall of the People. We are watching this motorcade very, very closely for any signs, and it looks like this is the U.S. president, of course. It's worth pointing out that the last U.S. president to visit mainland China was Donald Trump, of course, in his first term. A little over 9 years ago, if I'm not mistaken,
yes,
if memory serves me correctly. But this is going to be historic, and this potentially, if all goes very smoothly, this potentially could be the first of multiple times that these two will be meeting this year. We are getting a glimpse of the U.S. President, Donald Trump, as he makes his way, of course, into the bottom of the steps where delegations from both sides are waiting. You have this entire delegation from the U.S. side we just showed you, this entire Chinese delegation on the other side as well. So we are just waiting for him to step out. And, of course, the Chinese president, in case you missed our coverage a few minutes back, did just make his way down those steps, and I believe he is waiting. There he is in the blue suit. President Xi Jinping is waiting for Donald Trump, of course, to step out of the vehicle. And, of course, then we can begin, of course, this very important, world's most consequential bilateral meeting.
Yes, which was already delayed because of this Iran war. So it is much anticipated, as we've been talking about for weeks and months now. And there you go. You hear the music here and the procession as we await for President Trump to come out of his car. There he is, there, walking towards Xi Jinping. It's 36 hours. That's really not that long of time for the president to step down here in Beijing. And there you go. Another handshake there. Hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about that before they enter into these talks about, usually they do have a little bit of a sort of introduction here. Yep. They do speak to the press a little bit here ahead of this bilateral. So certainly, there you go. The two men. This is quite historic, Dave.
And it really is. There are very few, and this is far and few between, that we do see, of course, both of them, and as far as us being able to see them walk side to side like this. I think I'm just racking my memory the last time we actually saw them walk across the lawn together. But yes, it's worth pointing out, of course, that Donald Trump was last in mainland China as president, of course, back, I believe, during his first term. He is now currently... Of course, there's Wang Yi, of course, and he is just meeting, of course, the rest of the Chinese delegation. They're just waiting. Well, the Chinese group and, of course, the U.S. delegation is just a few steps away from where we are as well. Just to give you a sense of what is in store today. So if all goes to plan and on schedule, they will both make their way inside the Great Hall of the People for that bilateral meeting, followed, of course, by the state banquet, which is also being held at the same venue later tonight. And in a couple of minutes, you'll see, of course, that U.S. delegation and the U.S. president is ushering, of course, the Chinese president to meet, of course, his side of the congregation. Right?
Yeah, and it's interesting to know, right? These two men have met at least 6 times over the past decade. Those meetings, though, have mostly held during sort of the sidelines of, APEC or any sort of multilateral summits. So it is a little bit more, I guess you would say, meaningful that the fact that President Trump has flown all the way from the U.S. to the Chinese capital to meet for the first time in nearly a decade. So the pageantry certainly is showing here in full force. But, of course, what lies underneath that is, of course, the deeper fault lines that we do see. Let's not remember what happened. Let's not forget, I should say, what happened last year, right? When it was probably the worst that we've seen between this U.S.-China relationship during Liberation Day, and we saw tariffs north of 100% at one point. We have come back, down substantially on that front here. Whether we get any more sort of breakthroughs on the tariff discussions, that certainly is one thing that we're looking out for. We do know the U.S. has talked about bringing out reciprocal tariffs once again, once that Section 301 investigation concludes this summer. Whether the U.S. is willing to do that at risk of China retaliating is certainly one thing, but I think a lot of that decision depends on what happens in the next 36 hours.
And there is very little indication that this should not go smoothly, of course. If you're familiar with how the Chinese side tends to work things out, of course, the details are very important, and they are able, of course, to iron out many of these things ahead of these big meetings, of course. And yes, at the point Yvonne was just making there, how far we've actually come. It was literally this time last year, a few weeks after Liberation Day, when tariffs on both sides went up substantially over the course of days and weeks. But here we are, 12 months on from that moment in time. And you had the two presidents, of course, meeting here in Beijing to talk us through this. Yes, just to give you a sense of what else is coming up in store. And right now, of course, this military band is performing for both sides. If you're just listening in as well, is that the national anthem? It's
It's the U.S. national.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm just trying to hear above myself right now. And shortly after that, I believe, of course, we will also be getting the Guoge, which is the national anthem, of course, of China. But yes, I mean, today is pregnant with possibility in as far as the geopolitical conversation is concerned. And this is really just a sight that you're not normally used to seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hearing the Star Spangled Banner being played in Beijing certainly is something that you don't see normally in China. So certainly its performance, its welcome ceremony is very much underway here. We're going to be doing this for another few more minutes before the two enter into the Great Hall of the People for that official bilateral summit. So, certainly you're seeing the red carpet being pulled out here. I want to bring in Stephen Engel, who is just, not too far away at the Forbidden City here right now. And Steve, you're watching all these pictures, of course, unfold. Your initial impressions so far?
Well, it's sure the pomp and ceremony right now in the steps of the Great Hall of the People, and just meeting Donald Trump, going from the Chinese leadership, if you will. I saw Wang Yi, I saw He Lifeng, and then walking Xi Jinping over to visit with the U.S. cabinet. Essentially, the who's who of the Trump administration cabinet was there. Led at the front of that was Ambassador David Perdue, but you also had Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is the first U.S. defense chief to visit China since 2018. That's when James Mattis actually was there and met with Xi Jinping. But Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he's been, when he was a senator, he was twice sanctioned by the Chinese for his criticism of China's efforts in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. But he shook Xi Jinping's hand there and was greeted with a smile. The rest of the cabinet was there, and also Stephen Miller and Jameson Greer, the U.S. trade representative. So I think this is a high honor, obviously, for the U.S. president. The first time the U.S. president has been given a state visit here, a state gathering, since 2017. When it was also Trump. Yeah. I mean, how much the world has changed since that time, and how much it hasn't also changed since that point in time. And I think it's very important to just put everything into context. This is the world's most important geopolitical relationship. And one of the commentary that's come through in recent days, if this goes very, very smoothly, in a couple years' time, if we don't remember what happened during this meeting, that's probably a good thing. In many, many ways, that both sides learn to coexist with each other. It's also worth pointing out that from a business perspective, and as far as us talking about how each side is looking to reduce its reliance on the other, on the U.S. side of things, Anne-Marie, our colleague, of course, our Bloomberg surveillance co-anchor, who's there, a few steps from where these two presidents are, just gave us a very good reminder of how tied at the hip these two are. 20 trillion in market cap is the representation of those U.S. CEOs who are standing by for you there at the Great Hall of the People.
Yeah, interesting to note, too, Dave, that Marco Rubio actually did make his way to Beijing despite being sanctioned by Beijing. I think there's been some reports about just the sort of logistics and things that they had to do to really get him there. So it seems like there was a tremendous effort from the U.S. and China side of things to have a full delegation there to meet and have these discussions. So they are bringing, as Steve mentioned here, the whole team on board here to Beijing. And there you go, the cheering from, of course, the Chinese youth here this morning as the two men enter into the Great Hall of the People. And yes, there certainly is a lot of optimism, I guess you could say, on the ground there right now. Whether we do get sort of breakthroughs is another question, right? There are some constraints. There are going to be limitations on what can actually come about here, according to what the analysts and China experts and DC experts tell us here, because of the dynamics of where these two leaders stand right now when it comes to this Iran war. When it comes to the China side of things, they have not really done anything substantial in terms of trying to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Beijing has largely stood on the sidelines of this Iran war. And will that overshadow the discussions around trade, tech, and Taiwan? Certainly, it is going to be the elephant in the room. But President Trump has reiterated time and time again that he will not let Iran overshadow these talks, that there is plenty more on this agenda to go through here in the next 2 days or so.
Yes. So in a couple of minutes, if all goes to schedule, just give you a sense, about 12 minutes or so back, the U.S. president did arrive, of course, at the Great Hall of the People as they make their way through literally this parade and the pomp and circumstance and ceremony, of course, that is very indicative and characteristic, really, of these official visits. At 10:25, that's in about 13 minutes from now, both are stepping in for this expanded bilateral meeting inside the Great Hall of the People. Maybe just to get a sense of what to expect, where we perhaps should be tempering our expectations and where we should be perhaps putting some enthusiasm. Let's bring in our one of our first guests this hour, Gibbs, executive in residence at the University of San Francisco Center for Asia-Pacific Studies. He's also a former president of AmCham Shanghai, so he's fairly familiar with ongoings this part of the world. Mr. Gibbs, thank you so much for joining us, and certainly what an opportune time to be speaking with you, given this. I just want to get a sense of, people talk about how the U.S. side particularly does want China to open up its markets even further. I mean, you are familiar with how business is done, and being the former president of AmCham Shanghai, give us some context there. What exactly do you think China should be more open, welcoming to open, and what is already open?
Sure. Well, it's great to be with you. Great to be with all of you, and it's I enjoyed listening to your run up there. And just a couple of quick comments about your reporting there on the Marco Rubio situation. That's really fascinating to see. I can't remember any situation where a sitting Secretary of State is actually sanctioned by a country like this and still attends. I would point out that it's kind of interesting. China didn't actually need to do that. If you remember that under the previous President Biden, the chief executive of Hong Kong, John Lee, was sanctioned by the United States, and President Biden did not give him an exception to visit the United States during APEC. And so it would have been quite natural to reciprocate there. But it's good that the Secretary of State is able to make the trip. But yeah, this is an extremely important summit, no question about it. I mean, it's not the summit that President Trump was looking for, obviously, and I think you covered that how much the dynamics have changed in this situation and in the relationship. Also, it's fascinating to see the lineup of the CEOs. I mean, definitely the president has brought the A team there. I mean, that's an all-star lineup. And it's very impressive. I think you guys did the math there on $30 trillion worth of market cap. I won't challenge your math on that. It's very impressive. But you look at it the other way, and it's actually a lineup of American companies that very much need the China market. And in fact, you saw, Elon Musk there front and center. He's got a lot of exposure to the China market, both from a sales and revenue perspective and production. And he has actually seen his market share when Tesla came into the market. They made a big splash. And they were very much catering to the early adopters and are credited a lot, in my view, with kind of validating the market there for EVs. And they brought in a very sexy, cool car into the market, and the Chinese consumers snapped it up. But then following that is when you saw the market for EVs really take off. But Tesla they enjoyed maybe an 8-10%, maybe more market share in that market, and it has plummeted. They've lost a lot of share to BYD. They're down to maybe 3%, I think, in the China market, and globally they've lost a lot of market share to BYD. And so Elon Musk is showing up in China. He really needs that market. I think he's going to be looking for ways to kind of turn that around. But second, he's also, and Apple is in the same situation. They're very much dependent on China for production. So a lot of that production that Tesla has there in the Shanghai facility, a lot of that supports overseas markets outside of China. So they very much need that facility to keep running smoothly. And so when I see that lineup, that's probably the first thing I think of when is how much these American companies really need a good relationship with China.
Hey, Kerr, this is Steve Engel standing outside the Forbidden City. Thanks for joining us. Hey, I want to sort of, mention your book, The Fragile Dragon, and that's, both geopolitically and on the commercial front. What do you think can be gained geopolitically that will benefit the business community on national security front? They're talking about a board of trade, a board of investment, and we've also hearing reports about maybe identifying at least $30 billion of products by both sides that would have reduced tariffs as long as they don't fall under national security concerns. How concerned are you when you talk to the business community that trade and investment has been hindered dramatically because of the rise of the concern of national security?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning my book, Steve. I really appreciate it. This book just came out about a month ago, and yeah, it's very much the topic of the book is talking about the relationship itself, U.S. and China, and the idea that national security has really, I don't want to say eclipsed the commercial relationship, but it has really shifted the dynamic and has narrowed the lane in which these companies are able to operate. And so American companies really see the lane kind of closing in on basically we used to have to think about, what the Chinese side would allow us to do. But now it's navigating that narrow corridor between what China will allow and what the United States will allow. And I mean, one case in point, again, Jensen Huang having joined the trip, I think the H200 chips is the case in point. You literally need both countries to approve, right? At this point, my understanding of the current situation is that the White House has approved the sale of the H200, but Beijing is now dragging their feet in terms of they're going to control whether, and how much that chip can come in, because again, the hardliners in China would like to see them develop their own chips, and again, as you guys mentioned earlier, reduce that dependency on the United States. So the corridor is really narrowing, and that's a problem for American companies.
Kerr, it's interesting too. You mentioned about how some of these big tech companies in the U.S. still need China as a market. Do Chinese businesses, do you think, still need the U.S. the same way? I mean, you talk about the self-sufficiency that we've seen among, the Chinese, about how they can do it alone with whether it's legacy, and they can have cheaper models of AI and the like. And we have seen China diversify away from the U.S. in terms of the trade discussions as well. Their exports are still strong and resilient outside of the U.S. Do you think that narrative has changed dramatically now? China can go at it without the U.S.
Yeah. Do the Chinese companies need the U.S.? No. Do they want the U.S.? Absolutely. And the sector that where that's most obvious is probably in pharmaceuticals. When you see drug development in China, which is seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of really interesting therapeutics are coming out of China. But there's interesting dynamics going on within the Chinese market in terms of what they call volume-based pricing and other controls that have really limited the amount of revenue and profit that these companies can get within the pharma business within China. So I was just in China a few months ago, and I was visiting a few startup companies out there in Zhangjiang, just outside of Shanghai. And I was expecting a lot of the startups to really be ignoring the U.S. market because of all the tension and the tariffs and all of these kinds of things. But no, they were very much thinking about the U.S. market for their products, because the U.S. market is still the most attractive market. It's the most profitable for those types of businesses. What's going to be interesting is going back to the EV space. It's going to be interesting when the conversation turns to investment. And again, I believe that the Chinese companies, especially EVs, they're looking for any way to get into the U.S. market and the European market, because again, these are the largest, other than China itself. These are the largest and most profitable markets for automobiles. And I think that the Chinese EVs would very much like to get into that market. Now, that space is fraught with issues, and this gets into the U.S. domestic politics and the attitudes towards these electric vehicles, especially the Tesla. Are basically just huge data collection vehicles, and so you're going to have that issue for sure.
Yeah, Kerr, I want to bring in our colleague Anne-Marie Horder, and she is live at the Great Hall of the People. Anne-Marie, you're watching all this unfold, this exchange of hands, this pomp and circumstance. Tell us a little bit more about what's standing out to you now this morning.
Certainly an extraordinary display of pomp and circumstance as President Xi Jinping greeted President Trump here outside the Great Hall of the People. There was a military band as well as a number of school children here carrying American and Chinese flags. That got a huge smile from President Trump and an applause as well. And then as Xi Jinping led President Trump up the steps, past, of course, his cabinet, the likes of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Marco Rubio, I know Stephen Engel talked about earlier, was twice sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party when he was a senator. And then, of course, all the host of executives that are here from Wall Street and the tech sector alongside the president. You could see Xi Jinping was pointing out different parts of the structures around where the president was standing, pointing across to Tiananmen Square and then, of course, as well, where the Forbidden City is. They did seem to be in good spirits. It was a very warm greeting. You don't hear, the U.S. national anthem every day in this square outside the Great Hall of the People. So definitely a warm welcome. Obviously, the real negotiation is going to begin now. They will have a bilateral meeting today. They will also continue that conversation tomorrow. We are going to be keenly focused on any purchasing agreements that come from that. What happens in terms of the tech sector? Do they establish some sort of channel on how AI should work? And then really the thorny, tense issues of the Iran war and for China is going to be, of course, what the president says or doesn't say when it comes to Taiwan.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, before we let you go, I guess given perhaps some logistics items to be considered there, of course, where you are on the ground, I just want to ask you just one final question. Of course, this is an election year in the U.S. and midterms, and I guess in some ways, what Donald Trump brings home could indirectly help him win and his party win the midterms. How big of a potential factor could the next 48 hours be in as far as, the outcome in November is concerned?
It's a great point, David. Domestic politics will weigh heavy on the president while he's here. We just had hot inflation numbers yesterday. The cost of energy has been an issue for many Americans. You continuously see that in surveys and polls, especially the price of energy. Of course, gasoline is north of $4 a gallon across the United States. This has all been pushed up by the conflict when it comes to Iran. So I think for the president, he wants some sort of major wins to come back to the United States with. So maybe that's going to be jets. Maybe that's going to be soybeans for the heartland of the farmland of America. Or maybe it's potentially Xi Jinping and China being able to put their thumb on the scale when it comes to pressure on the Iranian regime. Of course, the Iranian regime has funding and revenue solely because of China. China buys 90%, the lion's share of Iranian oil. Potentially could Xi Jinping insert himself in a more assertive way in terms of that conflict, whether it's the Strait of Hormuz or maybe even putting more barrels on the market.
Anne-Marie, great stuff. Anne-Marie Horder in there joining us outside the Great Hall of the People. As you see inside those live pictures are inside the Great Hall of the People right now, where you have seen both the U.S. and Chinese delegation now seated on the table here. So certainly those discussions have begun. Looks like we didn't hear too much in terms of, initial remarks from both sides, which we did see during the South Korea talks at APEC. But it seems like they're just ready to go and kick off here, but you're hearing it right now. We'll see if we get any more translation from President Xi here, if there is an English translation on this feed. There's going to be, obviously, I think the positive tones that we're seeing right now, that's going to be, emulate for the next, few minutes or so. I think once you get into the deep sort of issues, I'm guessing they're going to be closing the door and not letting reporters in. So right now, we don't have audio yet, but there you go. You see President Xi there with his opening remarks ahead of these talks.
Yeah, if you're just joining us right now, this bilateral meeting, expanded one, just started, and as you can see, the Chinese president has just begun, of course, his welcome remarks. I believe we now have live translation. Let's listen in, guys.
Currently, transformation not seen in a century is accelerating across the globe, and the international situation is fluid and turbulent. The world has come to a new crossroads. Can China and the United States overcome the Thucydides trap and create a new paradigm of major country relations? Can we meet global challenges together and provide more stability for the world? Can we, in the interests of the well-being of our two peoples and the future of humanity, build a brighter future together for our bilateral relations? These are the questions vital to history, to the world, and to the people. They are the questions of our times that you and I need to answer as leaders of major countries. This year is the 250th anniversary of American independence. Congratulations to you and to the American people. I always believe that our two countries have more common interests than differences. Success in one is an opportunity for the other, and a stable bilateral relationship is good for the world. China and the United States both stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. We should be partners, not rivals. We should help each other succeed and prosper together and find the right way for major countries to get along well with each other in the new era. Mr. President, I look forward to our discussions on major issues important to our two countries and the world, and working together with you to set the course for and steer the giant ship of China-U.S. relations so as to make 2026 a historic landmark year that opens up a new chapter in China-U.S. relations. I will pause here and hand over to you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Well, President Xi, I want to thank you very much. First of all, that was an honor like few have ever seen before. And I think I was particularly impressed by those children. They were happy. They were beautiful. The military is obvious. It couldn't be better, but those children were amazing, and they represent so much. And I know they represent so much to you. You and I have known each other now for a long time. In fact, the longest relationship of our two countries that any president and president has had. And that's, to me, an honor. We've had a fantastic relationship. We've gotten along. When there were difficulties, we worked it out. I would call you, and you would call me. And whenever we had a problem, people don't know, whenever we had a problem, we worked that out very quickly. We're going to have a fantastic future together. Such respect for China, the job you've done. You're a great leader. I say it to everybody. You're a great leader. Sometimes people don't like me saying it, but I say it anyway because it's true. I only say the truth. And I just want to say on behalf of all of the great delegation that we have the greatest businessmen, the biggest, and I guess the best in the world. We have amazing people, and they're all with me. Every single one of them. We asked the top 30 in the world, every single one of them said yes. And I didn't want the second or the third in the company. I wanted only the top. And they're here today to pay respects to you and to China. And they look forward to trade and doing business. And it's going to be totally reciprocal on our behalf. So I really look very much forward to our discussion. It's a big discussion. There are those that say this is maybe the biggest summit ever. They can never remember anything like it. I can say in the United States, people aren't talking about anything else. But it's an honor to be with you. It's an honor to be your friend. And the relationship between China and the USA is going to be better than ever before. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. That was the opening remarks from both President Xi and President Trump. It looks like those live pictures have taken us back outside to the Great Hall of People as this bilateral meeting it begins. What we heard from President Xi in those opening remarks was that, it was very, in terms of the tone, very positive. What we heard from Xi was talking to steer China-U.S. relations in the right direction. You heard that really being echoed by Trump as well, saying that this relationship between the U.S. and China will be better than before. And he did say, though, he was looking forward, President Trump, to talking about the trade issue. Tells Xi trade will be totally reciprocal on our behalf. And he was looking to have a fantastic future together. That's according to President Trump telling Xi Jinping and really calling him a great leader. So the optics-wise, things have started off, of course, on a positive tone here. And certainly, President Trump said he was looking forward to talking about some major issues. Let's bring back Kerr Gibbs, executive in residence at the University of San Francisco Center for Asia Pacific Studies. He's also former president of AmCham Shanghai. Kerr, it's great to have you back. Thanks for standing by the way. Sure. I know in your previous life, you covered tech and you covered Taiwan very extensively. Given the fact that the president says he wants to talk about major issues, do you think Taiwan is going to be on the agenda? And how worried do you think Taipei should be about this summit?
Taiwan, yeah, that's going to be a big topic. Let me just make a quick comment, though, about what we just saw, which was quite remarkable to get inside the room and see them. And President Trump talking about the relationship, the personal relationship between him and President Xi. And I think it's worth pointing out a couple of things. Clearly they do have some kind of rapport, and it's clearly transactional and to some degree performative. And one has to wonder, how much strategic depth does that relationship actually have? But I just want to make a couple of quick points about Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. One is Xi Jinping, like all Chinese leaders, they do not like surprises, and so President Trump's improvisational style is definitely going to make him uncomfortable. Xi, and then the second point is just in terms of the relationship between them personally, President Trump has been known to tear up deals, and this is going to have an impact on the level of trust and the level of willingness that President Xi is going to be to make any kind of substantive commitment, knowing that the next president of the United States might actually tear it up, or even this president might go back on that agreement if he changes his mind. So that's going to have to affect how Xi Jinping kind of looks at the relationship. And then third, obviously, Donald Trump has done a fair number of things on the global stage that Xi Jinping is not happy with. Right now, the live issue is Iran, but let's not forget about Venezuela. Let's not forget about Cuba. And of course Ukraine. But you asked about Taiwan. My expectations on Taiwan, everybody's been talking about it because, again, on that point, right? President Trump has actually made contradictory statements on Taiwan, and in that context, one would have to ask, even if Xi Jinping were able to get President Trump to commit to change the language, change the way he talks about Taiwan, and we're talking about whether the United States would say, we don't favor independence. What is that really worth to Xi? Because again, it's he may come out with a contradictory statement the very next day. So I think that So yes, that's certainly going to be discussed. Yes, it's possible that President Trump will make a statement on that. But what's it worth? And then the second point is, on the arms sales, I would probably make the same point. It will come up in the conversation, I'm quite sure. And China would like for those arms sales to be reduced or stop entirely. But on the one hand, there's a substantial backlog anyway on those arms. And so Taiwan's not going to be getting those F-16s anytime soon. It's probably going to be 10 years or more. So in some sense, if there is a commitment on the arms sale, it could be, the sleeves off the vest.
Kerr, thank you so much for your analysis. Thank you and really staying on late there. Kerr Gibbs, executive in residence at the University of San Francisco Center for Asia Pacific Studies and author of The Fragile Dragon, Trade, Trump, and China's Vulnerabilities. Joining us now is Bonnie Glaser, Managing Director of the Indo-Pacific Program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Bonnie, it's great to have you. I know you've been watching all this unfold from where you are. Seems like the two start off with tremendous rapport. What are your expectations for the next 36 hours?
Well, I think that the conversations between the two leaders will focus on a relatively small number of issues. President Trump is primarily interested in trade because of the ongoing conflict in Iran. That is definitely on the agenda. And Xi Jinping wants to talk about Taiwan. I don't think there's going to be a lot of other discussion about geopolitical issues or other security issues. With prior presidents, there was more of a focus, I think, on security issues. But I think Trump himself is more interested in trade and ensuring that the United States is getting a smooth flow of deliveries of rare earth magnets and minerals, which are necessary to power just about everything that we use, and of course, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And the Chinese weaponized their dominance in the rare earth and critical minerals supply chain last year. I think that was really a wake-up call for President Trump and his administration. And since then, there has been a desire on the part of the United States to avoid provoking China to do that again. So, of course, I'm referring to the truce that was reached when they met previously in South Korea, in Busan, and the two leaders decided that they would hold off on implementing these export controls that they had imposed on each other. That agreement might be extended at this summit, but probably later this year, because there's still some tariff issues that are up in the air, because the Supreme Court has determined that the original tariffs that were used, not only on China, but on many other countries, were illegal. And the United States is now doing a Section 301 investigation. When that is complete, there will be new tariffs that will be imposed on China. We've already heard from Beijing that they hope that that doesn't happen. But I think the U.S. is committed to keeping those tariffs at about the same level that they have been in recent months.
Hi, Bonnie. Stephen Engel here in central Beijing. Let me jump in and pick up on that point. You're making a very important point, because this summit, all 36 hours of it, is not necessarily the panacea to all the ills that have crept up and really bubbled over the edge of the pot in the last year, with tariffs being risen as high as 145% and retaliatory moves by the Chinese. What is the message or the deliverable that needs to come from this summit so we don't necessarily go back to more tariffs and retaliatory strikes, high walls on export controls that will signal to the business community, oh, we can actually rekindle commercial ties?
Well, I do think that the business communities, both in the United States and China, want greater predictability. And I think that the leaders will provide that in terms of their discussions, even if they don't extend the agreement that was reached last year. It is due to expire this fall, and they will probably commit to extend it before then. I think both leaders want to have a degree of stability in this relationship. Xi Jinping is already looking to next year, preparing for the Party Congress, where he will likely get a fourth term in office. He is concerned about a number of economic challenges that he faces, and he has to deal with personnel arrangements for that Party Congress. He needs a modicum of stability in this relationship. And I think also President Trump wants stability. He wants to avoid a confrontation, whether that be in the Taiwan Strait or any place else. and wants to buy some time, essentially, for the United States to reduce its dependencies on China. And there is an active de-risking set of efforts that are underway in the United States. There probably will be the announcement of what is being referred to as a board of trade. And that will essentially be a mechanism to talk about what goods are not sensitive in both countries that we can export to each other. Some people say this is whitelisting trade, but they won't be discussing the more difficult issues of the Chinese subsidies, for example, for their companies, for their champions, or for the uneven playing field in China, because the U.S. market is far more open than the Chinese market is. And that's because the United States has essentially given up on trying to change China's economic policies and its development model. Instead, we are trying to deal with China as it is, protect the United States where necessary. But President Trump is quite fixated on reducing the bilateral trade deficit. It has already been reduced to some extent, but in this Board of Trade, I think there will be an emphasis on trying to export more American goods to China so that we can narrow this trade deficit even further.
Bonnie, David here. On technology and national security, and I appreciate those two things can be separate, but they do overlap, of course, on some points. And I guess my question is, do you think the U.S., Donald Trump and his team are able to convince the Chinese that while obviously national security is in their, they do have ground, of course, to worry about that when it comes to technology, but they're also not trying to stifle China's technological ambitions. Do you think that's possible?
Well, I think President Trump and his senior officials have said some contradictory things about technology. Certainly, the United States wants to maintain its lead, for example, in compute, in artificial intelligence. I don't think there is an effort to contain China's rise. We sometimes hear the Chinese use that language. But yes, the United States wants to ensure that it has a lead in some technologies, but the Chinese are going to compete. And we still have chips that have been approved for sale to China that the Chinese really haven't purchase very many because probably they want more advanced chips. And we know that the CEO of NVIDIA is on this delegation with President Trump, and maybe there will be a conversation about the chips that NVIDIA designs and makes, and perhaps the Chinese will try to convince President Trump to give a green light to sell them. But I think this will be ongoing. In the U.S.-China relationship, there will be some things that the Trump administration will greenlight. There will be other things that I think they will block.
It was interesting, too, in some of those opening remarks, there was this reference to the Thucydides trap when really classifying this U.S.-China relationship, Bonnie. I'm just wondering, when it comes to Taiwan, you say that China can afford to wait when it comes to what to do with Taiwan. Why do you think Beijing continues to play and should play the long game here?
Beijing observes very closely Taiwan's domestic politics as well as U.S. policy toward Taiwan. And I think that the Chinese see that time is on their side. They believe that this new KMT chair, the leader of the opposition party, the KMT in Taiwan, who recently visited Beijing and met with Xi Jinping. And she echoed many of the things that Xi Jinping himself says about the cross-strait relationship. She said she opposes Taiwan independence, for example. That's another example, not that they are certain that she will come to power, but I think at the end of the day, they think that there are real limits on what the current president in Taiwan can do. The opposition restrains what he can do because the ruling party in Taiwan does not have a majority in their legislature. And President Trump has, to some extent, been cautious in his policies toward Taiwan. He has, for example, put on the shelf reportedly about a $14 billion arms sales package for Taiwan. And we know that Xi Jinping has talked about his concerns about arms sales to Taiwan. He would like them probably ended or at least reduced. And that will come up, of course, in this summit as well. But I think that the Chinese look at the developments in Taiwan. They have patience. They don't see a need to take Taiwan today because they actually think that the trend is in the right direction. If you look at public opinion polls in Taiwan, you will see that the youth, particularly ages 20 to 29, are not as supportive of Taiwan independence as they used to be. In the questions they are asked about their identity, whether they see themselves as Chinese or Taiwanese or both. In the past, we saw higher numbers saying that they saw themselves as Taiwanese. Now we see people more frequently saying they are both Chinese and Taiwanese. So there are many things that are taking place in Taiwan, and part of this is because of what I think we should refer to perhaps as some Chinese soft power. Their apps like the little Red Note and very, very popular in Taiwan, for example. And maybe their narratives as well. Some of it may be information manipulation, but they send a narrative into Taiwan that the United States is unreliable and that Taiwan's future would be better if it were part of China. And I think that some of this messaging is beginning to be seen positively in some sectors, some quarters in Taiwan. So I don't think that China wants to take Taiwan by force. If they have to, as a last resort, they will do so, but it's going to be much better for Xi Jinping if he can take Taiwan through peaceful means, which includes coercion, because that's China's definition of peaceful.
Bonnie, thank you so much for joining us. Bonnie Glaser there, Managing Director of the Indo-Pacific Program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And for subscribers, you can also turn to your terminal for more on this. Our TLive Go is up and running, your function for the latest updates, plus commentary and analysis from our expert editors. We'd also like to thank our radio audience for joining in for our special coverage today. This is Bloomberg.
Success in one is an opportunity for the other. And a stable bilateral relationship is good for the world. China and the United States both stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. We should be partners, not rivals. We should help each other succeed and prosper together and find the right way for major countries to get along well with each other in the new era.
When there were difficulties, we worked it out. I would call you and you would call me, and whenever we had a problem, people don't know, whenever we had a problem, we worked that out very quickly. We're going to have a fantastic future together.
All right, as you can hear there, those are the opening remarks from President Xi and President Trump moments ago, of course, as they begun these bilateral talks here. The first really meeting we've seen between the two since, of course, 6 months ago in APEC. And yes, the personal rapport was certainly showing this, the world's most important bromance, as our BN team has said here, a full-on display. I want to bring back in our Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel, who has been tracking all this. And, of course, Steve, they're in closed doors now. This is where the hard work begins.
I was going to make that exact point. That was before the cameras. Then they kicked the cameras out of the Great Hall of the People. The doors closed. That's where they're going to get into the nitty-gritty, obviously, and then hopefully we'll get readouts from both sides fairly quickly. But this is just the first meeting of several that they're going to have. They're going to have a chance to walk through the grounds of the Temple of Heaven. Perhaps that's the time that Donald Trump will have his so-called long talk with Xi Jinping about the war in Iran, or maybe not. Maybe they'll find this time behind closed doors to push his points on Iran and Beijing's support of Tehran and trying to get a little bit more influence from Beijing to cajole, if you will, Iran to abide by some of the terms that the United States has imposed to end the war and to unblock the Strait of Hormuz. But again, there was all pleasantries. As we just heard the two gentlemen, it was Xi Jinping who said, I always believe that we, the United States and China, have more in common than differences. As you just heard, we are partners, not rivals. This relationship is a giant ship to steer, that they are stewards to steer the relationship in the right direction. So pleasantries, now it's the hard talk happening behind closed doors.
Well, so far so good. Steve, thank you so much. Stephen Engel there, just outside, of course, the Forbidden City, just very short drive away, of course, from where the meeting is currently taking place at the Great Hall of the People, also in Beijing. While that's taking place, markets actually are playing this, I think, very, very clearly for one, in the form of a stronger Chinese currency. And I think we're up 11 straight days now on the offshore rate, which actually means we're now looking at the longest win streak on CNH going back to 2017. Coincidentally, the last time I believe they met, right, in China. Like, look how that worked out. The tech space also very much in focus today.
Yeah, you know, when you take a look at what it's quieter than yesterday, I have to say, because maybe everyone's is very fixated on what's going on in Beijing. But you take a look at what we've been seeing, that the big movers have been, of course, this morning is Alibaba, over Tencent in some ways, right? Because the outlook and guidance from the CEO when it comes to AI services revenue could triple by the end of this year. I think that was enough to show that this company is really prioritizing AI growth over profits, and investors are actually liking that news and going with it. We're up 5.5% for Baba. Tencent's up some 1%. Samsung, the chips, still doing pretty well here today.
A look at the CSI 300. That's it from us here today. Our special coverage. We will see you all tomorrow. Thank you for joining us today.